I'm going to introduce Frank Shear in a minute. Thanks for coming out today. Got a message from the mayor. She wrote she'll be here in an hour or so. She's on her way back from the airport. So she says, although I'm not able to be here at the start of this event, I would like to welcome you to this presentation about a fascinating part of Woodburn's history. Southern Pacific Engine 1785 led a long and active working life until its retirement in the 50s. How it came to Woodburn is part of the story you'll hear today. You will see that our community welcomed the engine warmly when it arrived here in 1957. However, over the following years, the novelty wore off and it experienced years of neglect. When I moved to Woodburn, the engine was the engine in the weeds. Y'all remember that? Engine in the weeds? Like many residents, I was not even aware that the locomotive was city property or that it's parked in our smallest city park. The 1785's restoration into the thing of beauty that she is today has been a labor of love for many years. I first met Frank Shear when I was a member of the Woodburn Park and Recreation Board and saw him working on the engine. Over the years, I've marveled at both his depth of knowledge and his dedication to doing a truly museum-quality restoration. Our community is richer for his efforts, and we are very pleased to honor Frank's efforts and hear his stories of Woodburn's own engine, the 1785. So without further ado, Frank Shear, thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming today. So anyway, this is a kind of a complicated story and it's multifaceted. I won't be able to catch every little detail on this thing because it's just really complex, but we'll go over the high points today. And so this is the engine here. This was a thing that my friend Joe Dale Morris did. He does pen and ink drawings and he lives in Austin, Texas. And he just did it because he liked me and the engine and all those things, so he didn't charge me anything. He donated it to our group, and also the head-end view of the engine was the same thing. And he has rebuilt 14 engines, 12 of them in the Army. He was in the Railway Battalion Corps in Eustis, Virginia, or West Virginia, I think it's just Virginia. And they rebuilt all these engines there. And then also he did the TNNO 786 he rebuilt in Austin. Now this engine he took to Fort Worth area and rebuilt it in 2000. I helped him with the missing parts because the missing parts we had, of course, here on the 1785. So it was easy for me to make up some nice drawings, and his machinist could do that. So we'll actually see a movie of that engine running towards the end of this presentation. So anyway, I guess we'll go to the first slide here. And this was an SP company photo. I think it was at Sacramento, although it says SP New Mexico on it. It was a coal burner when it was built, and it had this interesting cylinder combination here, which they call Volklane compounding. Now, Samuel Volklane was the president of Baldwin Locomotive Works, and he made this patent. And what this thing did, maybe I'll get my little pointer out here. There's a high pressure cylinder here and a low pressure cylinder. And the way that this operated is once the steam was used once, they used it over again and it went into the upper cylinder. They thought this would promise great fuel economies and the like. Well, it didn't really quite turn out that way, because what happens is the steam, when it goes in the second time, is expanding at a much slower rate than it would on the high pressure end. So this crosshead here would tend to rock back and forth. They get extreme wear on these crosshead guides, and the engine would ride very hard. So they could only make about 35 miles an hour with these type of engines. And the crews used to call them slam pounds. They really hated them. So that was the thing. This engine was built in 1901. And so it's almost new photo. The 1785 was built in 1902, but it was essentially the same locomotive as you're looking at right there. And there were 83 engines that went into this class like this, and they were in the EF class. And so one of the things that they noticed started to happen during the early days was 1905, as the 1785 developed cracks in different places in the frame. And these original frames they were kind of an early light construction, their design was, and that they were not stress annealed, that they would end up cracking is what was one of the things that would happen to them. So they do thermite welds on them and the like. So that was a big issue. So around 1912, the 1785 was converted from coal to oil firing. Now, it was on the Salt Lake Division where they used it between Sparks and Ogden. And that division was under Oregon Shortline Management up to the 1912 time because the Union Pacific's involvement in controlling the SP at the time under Harriman control. And so they were getting coal from the Wasatch Mountains, which is east of Salt Lake, to burn in these engines. So around 1906, they started to convert the division to oil for through passenger engines. And then by 1912, it was a full conversion over to oil. And from what I understand, the old pit, there were still old ash pits at the Sparks shops. I don't know if they're there still, for cleaning out the ash out of the coal fires. And at that time, they converted her to oil burner, and then they replaced these cylinder blocks here for simple expansion, which were just 2 cylinders at that time with the valves on top. And so it ran that way for a while, and then in 1915, the whole class of engines in the mid-teens, they went and they created new frames for them, a better design actually. And so they would take these engines in and they would just take the whole boiler off, and there'd be the frame. They'd lift that up and they put new frames under them. And so to expedite the project, they would have new boilers, overhauled boilers all ready to go. And so they bought 4 new boilers to M8 specifications. And for the 1785, it got a new frame, it got a new boiler, and then it had the 1912 cylinders. And this was all done at Ogden, Utah in about October 1915. And so the old boiler actually went to this engine, the 1765. That's the old 1785's boiler on that engine right there. And that thing is still around. It's on display in Lomita, California. This is about the oldest photo I have of the 1785, taken by Guy Dunscombe, and it went into the deadline in 1933. There wasn't any work for it to do. And so this is August 1936, and somebody's working on the engine to return it to service. As you can see, the steam dome on top, they've taken the lid off to get access in there to do inspection. The thing in just 3 years just looks awful. And it looks just like an old Park engine or something. We notice there's a cab forward behind it, which was the big freight haulers, and its windows are missing, the coupler's missing, and a lot of things. So they would take parts off of these engines when they were on the deadline for other engines to keep them running. So here we go. After when they took it in to put it into service again in 1938, it went over to the Sacramento division. It probably ran over to Tehama for that was a junction for the Valley lines in California, Northern California. Probably went up to Dunsmuir a few times as a helper. That wasn't uncommon for these types of engines to be on there as a helper going up to Dunsmuir. So here it was at looks like a water column here to take water there in Marysville in 1940. This picture was taken at the Sacramento Roundhouse in 1941, and just previous to this I talked to an old-time fireman, and he told me that he was a fireman on the engine, and they were pushing trains up the grade from Martinez up to the bridge there, Martinez, Benicia, and then they would just cut off on the fly there, and he was telling me about that. And then they used it over here, the Roundhouse. In the wintertime, the tracks aren't too even with all the rains, and they'd be pulling a big engine in and out of the shop, and they need a heavier type locomotive like this engine here to place them in and out of the shop. So when Pearl Harbor came, immediately this engine went to the Tucson division. And someone, Life magazine, took a photo of it in 1942, and here's the 1785 right there in it on the left. And so it wasn't over there too long. This is a coaling tower here at Lordsburg for taking coal. Now the 3717 might have been a coal burner working the old El Paso Southwestern, which was acquired by the SP in 1942. And of course, the 1785 was always an oil burner after 1912. So anyhow, it came back rather suddenly after the being in the Tucson division, not even quite a year, and here it is over here at Florin, which is just south of Sacramento, and they were using a 442 Atlantic, which is more of a light passenger engine and freight. There was such a rush during the war years that they just about use anything, and so this is at Florin. You'll notice the headlight dispersion shield, and that was to dampen the headlights so it couldn't be seen by enemy aircraft, which they feared a Japanese invasion of the West Coast. And back along the firebox, they put shields over the air intake, air dampers, so the fire wouldn't be reflected enough to be seen from the air. This is Santa Barbara Yards, 1946, a photographer's unknown. I don't think it was probably down there probably too long, and it's just an engine that you actually got around quite a bit, as you'll see in the next one right here. It was actually an LA division engine, and here it is. Bill Bassler, he was from Pasadena, I think, took this photo in 1946. This is Alhambra, just east of downtown Los Angeles. Now here again, we're actually using it as a helper because the grades from Alhambra up to Colton, there's a few spots of 1% grades, so this would keep the mainline trains on time. This is a 5040 here, which is a big 3-cylinder engine. These things are actually, the boiler I think is bigger than a cab forward. They were just monstrous engines that were built in the 20s. And so the 1785 is up here on the point. Now one thing you might notice about the engine is a sheet metal headlight that they used on the engine. They called them sunbeam headlights. Sacramento shops used to make these tin things. They were 16 inches in diameter. The reason they were so big is the headlight reflector material wasn't that good in the old days, so they actually had a bigger headlight to kind of shine some light on the tracks. I think they called them golden glows or something. They say that's about all you can see is the train coming. So that's one thing there. Here's Taylor Roundhouse here in 1948. It's still got the big headlight. It's received new cylinders here with a major shopping in 1947 at LA General Shops. The cylinders had to be replaced, and this is the time that they had put the engine back in a big hurry. Some of the springs were in the wrong places and stuff, and we can kind of get into that a little bit later when they're getting ready to retire the engine. Then it got up to Fresno. It looks like it got loaned up there. The interesting thing about this tender here is this tender is still around. It is actually on display behind the 1727 in Dunsmuir, California. You know, this is Puente, California, which is between Taylor Yard and Colton, California, which is kind of east of Los Angeles. And they always used to drag these cuts of cars. They could be empties. They look like they're empties coming up from the Taylor, from Colton to Taylor. They're westbound in this photograph. This is a closer view. Richard Berry took it just a couple days later. There's a drinking box that held ice and water where looks like the engineer is getting himself a drink of water. This is later on. The engine was assigned in late 1951 to the San Joaquin Division, and here it is up here at Fresno. It's just outside the roundhouse. There's a sand tower here for taking sand, and there's a water column. It looks like that's, well, I don't know if that's an oil. Here's the oil column right here. So it's just sitting there at the roundhouse. Headlight's been replaced with a regular Pyle National cast iron headlight. I think that happened probably just in the late 40s. This is a photo by John Shaw leaving Kingsburg. I think the next photo actually shows them switching down there, which was the thing at Kingsburg, and that's about 54 miles, I think, south of Fresno, I believe. No, maybe it's not. I actually have some notes here that tell us a little bit about where that was. And it's south of Fresno, 24 miles south of Fresno. Okay. This is another Fresno shot, photographer unknown. Another unknown photographer. These things I think a friend of mine took off the internet or something, and here they are. Color shot right there at Bakersfield. Now this is an interesting shot. Octol. It's about 54 miles south of Fresno, and it looks like these are empty reefers coming back in. I see the hatches open here. This is the roundhouse at Fresno, and that's kind of like an overnight local turn train. And I don't know the origin of Octol. Sometimes these funny little names are really telegraphers where they've taken a longer name and they've shortened it or something to make it fit. So that might be the case too, unless John knows. Do you know Octol, what that was?
I don't remember where it is, but they refer to it as it's obviously a turning point where he worked to Octol and back. And that was probably the length of the shift he was working on.
Yeah, that 54 miles going down that way and doing all that switching and like, so he was probably putting in a 12, 16-hour night maybe, possibly in those days. Then let's see, here's another photographer unknown. Bakersfield, 1955. The color shot. One of the things that's kind of funny that they did at Fresno, they'd paint the cylinder head silver, they'd paint the tires and the running boards with white in those days. It's just something that they did for about a year, and then they had to go back to the standard after that. So I think it's something that the main office probably frowned on. It was non-standard. Here is the McKittrick branch, and it's a long ways out there. It's about 47-mile branch line. And so John Shaw was out there this day, and it has a water bottle car. It's auxiliary tender that carries water. It's a long ways to go, and I suppose there wasn't any water tank out there. But it's just a long ways out to the middle of nowhere. And here he is. I think he's coming back. I don't know. This is Allied Seed, and I don't know the location. Do you know? You don't remember? Okay. And so lots of times a fireman would see a guy out there with a camera. He'd start pouring on the oil to make the thing smoke for the photographer. They're not always that dirty, but it makes them kind of...
It looks like in the background, the mountains on the left side of the engine there, so that may be way down below Fresno.
Oh, it is. It's out of Bakersfield. There's a Kern Junction.
You can see the mountains from there.
Yeah, the Tehachapis, I guess, or something. It's the mountains because San Luis Obispo is over on the other side a little ways over there. San Luis Obispo, I don't know if there's mountains named that or not, but the Tehachapis are over here. Kern Junction's about 7/10 of a mile south of Bakersfield, and then it goes out this 47-mile branch line. Actually, it's two branches, but this is the McKittrick branch where he's going out here. And so this was a day when he was going back out. John catches him out here. Nice color shot of it going out of town there. And they hauled agricultural products and cattle and sheep, and some of these hoppers carried scrap iron and the like. There was a lot of varied businesses out there. It brought in quite a little bit of money for the SP company. It was a very profitable branch line. This is Buttonwillow. This is the station. I think it's about 15 miles from the end of the line. I think it was the main station on the McKittrick branch, and here he is coming back, I think it is, on the branch line through Buttonwillow. This is near Gosford, another spot on the line, and I think this is the Tehachapis right up here, maybe where I-5 now goes up over the mountain, I'm not sure. So anyway, kind of a nice little shot with the reflection in the pool there. This is where he's starting to blow the boiler down. This was in February, so it's kind of a cold, dreary day down there in the Southern California area that day. This is a little better shot. You can almost hear the steam coming out of the blow-down muffler here, and blowing the sediment out of the mud ring of the firebox is what they do to keep the water cleaner so it doesn't foam. So yeah, you can just about hear it, I think. These mufflers were actually applied about 1942 to all the SP engines, and it was a safety reason because the steam is actually broken up, the energy of it, through all these pipe elbows and T's that it goes through, and so it actually disperses the energy a bit. Before that, the steam used to blow down between the tracks, and it'd blow up the ballast and actually cause some of the ballast to get contaminated, and it would actually shunt signals and the like. So this is what they came up with in 1942. Kind of a unique device. It just looks odd. 1956, it made a quick trip into LA General Shops to get the valve gear replaced. The linkages were all worn out, so they had to put in new straps and new brasses and all that at that time. This was a McKittrick Branch Agriculture Vendor Special, June 1956. 9 heavyweight cars. I think the SP was sponsoring this, and these vendors, reps would talk to the farmers. They'd have a diner car here, and they'd actually, that's how they did business in supplying things for the farmers out there. This is near Fresno, July 1956. A photo by Bob Trenert, and it's near, yeah, I think it's just south of Fresno. I don't have a location for it. This is leaving for the Friant branch, which is a 24-mile branch. It goes up to the Friant Dam. There was quite a bit of business in those days, and so he's going out of Fresno. This is out there a little bit out on the line. They carry a lot of hopper cars that carry sand and gravel from the rock, and there was a gravel quarry, I think, up there. There's another side view that's kind of clanking along here. This is going up the hill again. The photographer must have been spotted, so the fireman opened up the firing valve, poured the oil to it, and made it smoke.
Didn't have his blowers on either.
Well, he's probably chugging pretty good there, I think. And so this is up here at the Friant Dam, and this dam, they used a lot of that rock from that quarry. They probably hauled thousands of carloads of sand and gravel up to build this dam, which was, it was in major construction from 1939 to 42. It was built by the U.S. Bureau of Land Reclamation, and I think that must have been a WPA project. It's a San Joaquin River. It sends irrigation down to the farmlands in the San Joaquin Valley. The line used to keep going up here before the dam was built. It was a logging company that went bankrupt. So this was more or less the end of the line. There's a water column here that's a little primitive, but it does the job. Here's the valve, it looks like, to turn it on. The next photo is the Armstrong table, this big arm here. This is a train crew, a young brakeman out there, so I guess it's 3 guys, and they're pushing the engine around on the turntable. One of my favorite photos, actually. Good people photo. This is returning on the Friant branch, and so this is all these hopper cars full of sand and gravel that they were hauling back. And this is again Friant branch near Fresno, 1956. And here he is returning to Fresno. I think this was a different day than some of those previous photos because the cars are different in the back. I don't know just where this is in Fresno, Oak Leaf restaurant, but kind of typical 1950s restaurants. And here, this is the sad time right here. Is on September 24th, 1956, a general manager's order went out not to use any more steam unless absolutely necessary. This is probably just a few days after the engine made its last run, so they'd cover up the stack. They actually covered up the turbo generator to prevent moisture from getting in there. So there she is on the deadline, and Fred Stent took a photo of it. And the thing was, is they were going to keep these engines serviceable. This one was in the poorest condition. The tube time in the boiler had run out. It had some broken leaf springs from when they put that overhaul together too quickly in 1947. So this engine needed quite a bit of work. Other engines, 1727, 1749, 1777 were there in Fresno, so they were going to use those later in 1957. That's what they were thinking, that they'd get busy again, but the economy downturn, they had enough diesels, they never used those engines, they scrapped those engines. So this one, it was kind of a fluke, it got saved just because it was a bit more worn out. This was an engine that was well liked by the crews, the people that I interviewed that had worked on this engine, firing it and running it, liked it quite a little bit. So anyway, we get to the point of donation. This is Lovett Smith here. He was a superintendent, the Portland Division of the 50s. Bernal Quayle was his public relations man. And that was just an SP company photo, some sort of meeting that they were having. But these people were very involved with this donation of locomotives thing. Oh, in those days, yeah. Here again, they're both right here, Lovett Smith and Bernal Quayle. This was out at, I think, a little restaurant on Highway 99. This is Gene Stoller and Joe Sears, and I think this is Winton Hunt. He was a state of Oregon legislator, and they were having a meeting out there on planning on how to get this engine to Woodburn.
I know Joe Sears.
Okay, so they went down and looked at this Huh? Okay, so this is the first proposal the SP came up with to the group. They said, go down and look at this engine at Eugene. And so it's sitting down there by the turntable. It's just a 1200 class 6-wheel switcher. And Ed Peters was the master mechanic, is what they called him in those days. And he came out and said, well, you probably don't really want this engine. It's all worn out, and it's a little engine. It's a switch engine. They never used these in Woodburn. And the group kind of said the same thing. And so they were really a little bit afraid that maybe the SP wouldn't like that because they're going to ask for another engine. But that's what they finally decided to do. They rejected that and proposed to the SP to get another engine. And this is what they ended up choosing. They sent a letter to the city of Woodburn around the end of the 1956 offering up this engine. The city of Woodburn accepted. It was donated on January 2nd, 1957. Here it is on the 657 by, I think it was Larry Harrison was a photographer, sitting on the line to go into the Sacramento shop to get a paint job. You'll see so the cover on the stack and the cover on the turbo generator. And what the railroad was doing is that so many people were laid off. They probably laid off a third of their mechanical force going over to diesels, and they felt it was a goodwill gesture, public relations, to donate these locomotives to cities, and that was kind of what they were doing at the time. So there's a real interest to that. They donated them and wrote them off as a charitable donation to cities. This is the engine had come up to Salem after the paint job. They had removed the pistons to make it easier to haul it up here. They had a machinist apprentice right along as a messenger on the engine, and he would oil around and grease around the bearings and the like and towing it up here. I have copies of the original train orders. They're only supposed to do 35. We know that they went faster. We found blue marks on the axles, which indicated those were overheated a bit when they were towing it up here. It actually sat there for about 3 weeks before it got here. At this point, we'll look at the site that the engine was going to go to. Woodburn has quite a history of railroad, its legacy and history here, and this is a helper that's just been turned on the Y. They would come down from Portland and they would cut off a train and run down here, and then they'd turn around this Y-shaped thing, and he's just getting ready to return to Portland. So they used that because Hydo Hill had 1.1% grades on curves and the like, and they had to get a little bit extra muscle to get them here on time. Passenger trains and freights that were kind of time sensitive, they do that. This is one of the water tanks here. There was another water tank over here later or earlier, and there was a standpipe down here to take water. The interesting thing about the photo, of course, is the size of the city then. and the buildings, a lot of them are still there. But this was the city of Woodburn. There's no freeway out there or anything like that. So it's kind of interesting. Walt Kleinschmidt climbed up the old city water tower. He worked for the water department. I think he was their supervisor, manager. So he climbed up that old 1912 tower and take photos of the city, and now that tower has been removed.
Water superintendent.
That's what he was. Okay, water superintendent. This is a photo taken about 1900 of the same area over there. There was a water tank there earlier. There was also a turntable here with a little 440 engine being turned on the Y. I don't know if it was used as a helper or it came back from Staten or what, because there was just only one track that went out there. There wasn't the Y over here that went the other way. And I don't know who took that photo. They said there was an old undertaker or something in Woodburn at that time that took photos downtown. I don't remember who he was or his name, but there was a windmill here for a well to draw water up to fill this water tank. This was a pretty common thing. They'd overhaul an engine and they'd redo all the bearings, everything, and they do a break-in run just to make sure they don't run hot, and they kind of break in. So this engine, 4340, I think that's an MT4, was up here in the 1930s. These are some of the best locomotives I think the SP ever had, and so they probably cut him off as a helper, and we're going to turn it and send it back to Brooklyn Yards. This is where the helpers were turned. Here's the old bank building right here. The engine display is behind this locomotive here in the water tank. And so they'd turn on the Y here after being cut off the train. Here's the water column for taking water. I think these guys, they probably coupled together and went back to the Brooklyn Yards. This is the 2908 is switching. He's backing up. Actually, he's kind of blurred there, so he's in motion. So he's switching Woodburn. This is the type of engine that they had to use to go up to Staten because the rail was so light, or over the bridge at the Santiam River. That was about the only engine that was rated to go over there. Looks like we have some livestock cars in here too.
We still have some Kleinschmidts living here in Woodburn.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Come on in.
This thing here is the old axe handle factory, and the story had it, what Gene Stoller told me, is that it burned down one night. There were trains blocking the tracks here. This is in 1943, and the fire department couldn't get there, so it largely burnt down. The old boiler, shop boiler, and the smokestack are still intact. So this is where the engine sits now. When we had dug down for foundations for signals and like, we found a lot of old bottles and different things, a lot of old charred wood actually that was from that old factory. This is down here at the old track shanty, and this was a track that went up to the east of the station. So these guys had brought down this rail from Union Oil Company, fastened together 62-pound rails, a temporary track. So they had to slide this piece of track over to connect to it. Almost the same photo right here too, photo from Woodburn Independent. This is pushing the engine in. This is February 1st, 1957. So we're celebrating the 55th anniversary here, about 3 days late. But anyway, this is towing the engine. There was a New York Central boxcar, and he just pushed it into the site. This is, next photo is the Woodburn Independent, showing it being pushed back to the engine site. At this time, we'll take a look at the movie. 1785 arrives. I think you'll enjoy it. This is out of the old Union Oil Company out at 99 and Cleveland Street. There was an old spur track with 62-pound rail. They donated it, and they're actually picking it up and towing it out of there. I think this is Paul Sears here, and this is Joe Sears. And I think some of these other people were JCs or something, or the Rotary Club or something of that nature. Now we're down at the site here at Woodburn. So they had to bring in a lot of gravel and a bulldozer to push down the ballast to lay down that track. That's Joe Sears on the bulldozer there. Yeah, Burlingham on the right there. And here comes the train down the main line. These are either SD9s or Jeep 9s, the Black Widow paint scheme. And here they are backing the engine up into the site. What's interesting, they're brushing along that old oak tree there, hitting the branches. I've never seen that before. These little trees that were in front were later, they were removed. Cleveland Street right here. York Central boxcar. This is the mayor of Woodburn, Woodburn Workman. Okay. There's a Lovett Smith, Portland Division Superintendent. There's a Gene Stoller right here taking his photos.
That's Frank.
No, I don't think so. Okay, so this is cutting back the tracks right here, just after the engine was pushed in and they dismantled that other track going in there. But it gives you a good illustration of how they pushed the rails over to get that in there. And here's Lovett Smith up in the gangway. Lovett Smith was a really outgoing type of really nice person to deal with. And when he died, he actually donated me his photo collection. His son donated that. I think he died sometime in the 1990s, but he's a very outgoing, a very people-oriented person. This is Winton Hunt speaking here. This is Bernal Quayle, the PR man. This is Lovett Smith here. This is Leaf Abbott, I think, and I'm trying to think who this person is here. Okay, it's Workman, the mayor. And so this is Marion County Citizens Band playing, and this is Winton Hunt gave a speech. Several of them gave speeches up there actually that day. This is a video of the dedication, so we're going to see this. This was in July of 1957. Joe Sears brought down his steam tractor. They hooked up a hose to the whistle. They were able to blow that whistle for the dedication ceremony. Here's the band playing, Marion County Citizens Band.
Sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately we don't have sound with this and our music with it. I think that was Lovett Smith speaking there, I'm not sure. Now this is Winton Hunt. Kids were all over it. They were yet to put a fence around the engine. That was stipulated by the Southern Pacific. They used an old PG substation fence.
Hey
They
man,
put-
is that truck still around?
I wished it was.
No,
A Citizens Band.
Frank, can we still blow the whistle?
Oh, you could if there was steam to blow it. We've done it on air since then.
hook up air to it.
Yeah. Nice little steam tractor there. I think it's down at Brooks now. Still use it. Okay, now we're backing clear up to February 1st. The engine had just come here and everybody's real excited about it, just looking the thing over. What the heck is it, you know? So they're going to get a good look at it. Wintertime. This old oak tree fell down in 1974, wiped out part of the fence, and I was able to actually go in there and look at the engine. I was just amazed at that time. Now, a lot of these little trees later would obscure the view of the engine. But see, they haven't cut away the track here yet, the 62-pound rail in the front. Okay, so about 20 years has elapsed here. In June of 1977, I guess I'll have to kind of back up a little bit. We were working on the Oaks engines at that time in 1976 at Oaks Park. We formed a nonprofit group in the spring of 1977 called the Pacific Railroad Preservation Association. And so I and Chris McClarney and Gene McKinley and myself, we talked to the city about the engine down here, and they didn't really know what to do with this thing. So they were happy to have somebody come in and do some volunteer work on it. So this was the first day in 1977, and Gene McKinley had a nice 35mm camera, took a photo of it. So that's what the thing looked like. I guess you guys kind of remember that, do you? And this was a real dear friend of mine, retired SP fireman. He came in and did some consultation, you know, the first actually week or two of this thing. And this was an odd thing. I took a picture of him, and then and I had a premonition of this. He was gone like 2-3 weeks later. He just died suddenly, which was kind of a sad thing. This tender here got a lot of the crud from the stack. They'd pour on that firing valve and just raw oil would shoot out the stack with steam, and it'd just be like glue. It'd shoot down here on the tender and just make a horrible mess, and then they just paint over it and paint over it. And so we had all that to remove off of there. There was a lot to go through, chipping, scraping, and sanding. That's the old Southern Pacific lines. And the funny thing is that when we took that off, we thought, is this gold leaf? It was really yellow. Well, it was the old varnish, or the old aluminum bronze is what they called it, which is a aluminum bronzing powder that they mixed with varnish, and it always turned yellow with age. That was the thing until 1947 when they went to the lettering and striping gray. This was Chris McClarney. We'd gotten the tender painted, and he took some old diesel stencils, I think, or something, was able to reverse them, put them up with magnets, and shoot the paint on that. Southern Pacific donated all the paint to us, which was really kind of a nice thing. So here he is touching the letters up after that time. This was a big project in 1982-83. We were able to get about 1,700 pounds of 16-gauge sheet metal sheets. I think they were 4x10s or 5x10 sheets donated to us, and here we are. So we're going to do a whole new jacket. The old one's full of holes. We've had the steam dome cover off. I can see the bolts are off of it where we've oiled it, and so all this is gone. all this is cleaned up and rust chipped down. And the next photo will show us that we painted it with a red lead paint. The firebox is yet to get painted. This is Chris McClarney up on top of the boiler. This is Chris standing on top of the sheets, and I use a Milwaukee Sawzall to cut pieces out. If I just match them to the old pieces and number them, that was kind of how I did that. And this is how the sheets were put up, and any further cutting was done at Wolfer's Sheet Metal in their little sheet metal shop, or out at the Pacific Building Systems. They had a shop in there too for cutting a lot of this metal out. So this was putting the jacket on fall '82, and I was up there. Chris McClarney, David Workman, I believe, is still a citizen of Woodburn. I think he still lives here. This is me, and in the rain, it was just a real rainy January, February out there, putting on these stretch straps is what I was doing. It just rained on us.
What happened to the change?
What change?
From you to you.
Well, let's look at the date. Okay, this is the sheet that we put on the cylinders. Of course, we had to peen that over and things like that, so that was a new sheet. This little piece here slides up so you can check the oil lines that go in to make sure that they're oiling the cylinders. This was a photo done by Dan Dinges, and so this was Chris McClarney, this was Scott Reese, Frank Longerman, this is me, Frank Shear, and this was Jim Hanrahan here. And that was a kind of a group portrait of us at the time. 1985, Bob Zink, he happened to take a photo of this. Snowy day in 1985, that's a photo that I took. It snowed that day. Actually, by this time, Chris McClarney had kind of moved on in 1983 to work on the 700 project in Portland. He kind of took the group with him, so we actually formed the Oregonian Railway Historical Society in 1985, and we named it after the old narrow gauge that used to come down Cleveland Street and cross behind the engine. Well, that's where it got the name. This whole front end was rusted out. We had to have a metal fabricator weld all that in and restore it, so we were able to put that all back together in 1986. This is a 30th anniversary in 1987, February, and I know just Gene Stoller here, and these are some people that he knew. Some of you in the audience might know who these people are. I don't know who they are. I think they were friends of his that had worked on bringing the engine here. They're Rotary Club, or else they're JCs or the like.
One's a Zollner and one's a Bauman.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I know my relatives.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they live around here. Okay, so another project that we embarked on about 1985 was putting a wood cab ceiling. We had to replace this metal trim piece. There were all these holes that were drilled in the cab to support conduit, the little straps and electrical devices. And so Wayne wanted to come in with his torch and fill up all those little holes and that sort of thing to get that ready to go. This is me putting in the cab ceiling. I had to make all these arch rib blocking pieces, and a lot of them we used like a roofing cement to glue them up there, and then that would hold them until we could bolt them up. This wood I made in a cabinet shop, Mountain Home Cabinet Shop in Milwaukee, out of 1x3s, milled it for the tongue and groove and the bevel, and then I painted it all good inside and out, so that was, I even used galvanized nails on it. So this was part of that restoration job that day.
What color do you paint the inside?
Lettering and striping gray.
Because most of it was cab green they used.
Well, that used to be, but this, now this stuff, the Southern Pacific, I mean, we could go into a long discussion on cab paints, believe me. The green was a Baldwin color. It was developed not to show dirt. Now, many engines up in this area here with the SP were green. Down in the Los Angeles area, they like to show off a little bit. LA General did this, Oakland shops did it, and they would use a machinery gray or lettering and striping gray. There's even a light green that Tucson shops like to do back in those days. So anyway, this is it. Kenneth Johnson came here and took a picture of the completed interior of the cab at that time. And this was, it's more of a night celebration. This was also a photo that he took just before that night of me. This was used in a magazine article, Locomotive and Railway Preservation. I think it was in 1998. And it was one of Bob Yarger's newsletter articles, and they took this photo of me, kind of a raggedy looking person, but that's the way it was in those days. It was a dirty, hard work. So we had a celebration, and this was in June 25th, and it was more or less a night shot. Roger Hancock came up, and he did a lot of machinist work for us out of a little machine shop that he did a lot of donation work on that. So it was a celebration of the finished cab restoration and the like. And there's more photos here. This was our old one-arm signal. We were able to turn on the light on that. And so that was a night shot. This shot here, Bob Zink did, and he would come in with a water bottle with these watercolored things, you know, to actually make it look like stains on the boiler, oil stains and the like. Took that photograph, and that was used on the cover of the SP and Technical and Historical Society Trainline magazine in December 1991, which I did an article on the M6, M8 moguls. This is a customer special passing the 1785 in December 1989. A friend of mine, Doug Bauer, happened to catch that day going through the photo. This is the engine at sunset, one that I took in 1989, kind of a mood shot. This is Gene Stoller, who first brought the engine to Woodburn, and myself, 1989. This was also used in that magazine article I just quoted, and it said this was the rescuer and then I was the restorer. That was kind of like the title of it for that magazine. Now, Gene died in 1993, he passed away, but he was the person that had the dream of bringing this engine here in 1956, and he dreamed that someday it would be able to run on the branch line out there. So that's the deal on that. Here's another photo, new paint job, summer 1991. More of the same, the front of the engine. This is the tender. I think that was one of the nicest jobs that we'd gotten on the engine. This one here was people that consulted down here for historical information. There was Ray Lewis. These were guys that retired, and Ray Lewis was the car shop foreman at Brooklyn. This was Ed Peters. He was what they called the master mechanic in his day, and his career started in 1928. He started as, and I think he was 16 years old, as a machinist apprentice at El Paso, Texas. This was John Taylor. He was our president of our group later on, and he was a retired fireman, engineer for SP, and his hire date was 1942. Herb Miller was a conductor that ran through here quite a bit on Amtrak, but he'd worked for SP for many years. So we decided to get together one day and just get a group portrait of these guys as for an article I was writing on how the retired railroaders can help you as far as doing research and consulting on these jobs. There's another picture of Ed Peters right here in the cab, and this guy, he was almost like a dad to me, and I bought a lot of stuff from him, and we talked a lot about mechanical things, and he died in 1996. This is a photograph of my cousin Louis Stover, his wife Jessie, myself here, and this is Margaret, their friend and neighbor, and they happened to come by one day. But yes, Louis did a lot of machining for me over here. This is myself, and I was making this mold up for the back head for shaping metal and the like for that back head. Here's the wigwag signal foundation. We just poured that, and this is the wigwag laying on the ground, and that was the spring of 1983. This is a little bit later. Well, no, this was right after we installed it. We had to have a crane to put that thing up. The next one is just a few years later here, the highway grade crossing. This thing came from down around Albany someplace, and they donated it to us, and it was a very typical grade crossing signal. That's what I'm looking for, is typical things of the era that people would remember. They offered us one that was really different, but I wanted something that was typical so people can remember that era. This was a very nice thing. In 1993, this signal came from Oakland, California, not California, Oregon, but just north of Oakland, milepost 590. And they were taking out these signals and retiring them on the Siskiyou line, the signal department. I made a request to Bob Melville, written request for this thing. And what was interesting, I didn't know when it was coming. I went in one day to look, and I walked around the engine, and I almost tripped over this thing. I didn't even know it was there. And I was just so amazed that they brought it in without a scratch. They didn't charge us anything, and set it down right there. So I had to strip the thing down, do a lot of sandblasting and painting, and I think this is Bill Tripp behind me, and here I am. I don't know. I don't think I could take a photo and be there at the same time. But anyway, here's the SD9. I used to park there on that house track, and this was a city's gravel pile, and this is where the original fence was at that time. So I think we were consulting or trying to figure something out right there. This is a man named Steve Esther. He came over to work on the signal for me, and so he climbed up there. He has one good leg, and the other one's artificial. I think it was a challenge to him. He climbed up there and he put these glass lenses in the spec casting, and that was in 1994. This is by my cousin Louis. Pictures of the signal right here. It's a two-arm. This is kind of like absolute stop, but this one here is telling you by timetable when that comes up that you have to be prepared to stop short of the next signal when this one's even in the clear position. It's kind of like where the yellow traffic light idea came from, I think. And here they're both in the clear position. Here's a milepost marker, 590 miles and then 7/10 of a mile from the ferry building in San Francisco. That was milepost 0. This is an all clear position right here. So this would be, you could proceed, but you had to be prepared to stop at the next signal. And then this one's out, it's all stopped. They're both going to be out like that, but in this case, it's an all clear position.
And also had lights showing, Frank.
Oh, at night, yeah, you had the little light bulbs in there too, which you can't hardly see during the day. They're just little 10-volt bulbs. This is the old phone booth here, 12th and Union Street. What this was used for, the track used to come down here. We're kind of looking south here. And then there's 12th Street, Union Street, and the tracks used to go to Dallas. And they went over that Willamette River Bridge there. And what they used to do with this thing is they would have a guy, they'd call him a herder. He'd come out of here, he'd get the okay from the, I guess, the yard master to come in the yard. He would go down there, the train would be stopped on the bridge. And Salem, city of Salem had a lot of problems with tracks and things all around them in those days. And these trains would block the crossing. So he'd get the okay, and then he'd light up a fusee, and he'd give them the highball, and they'd see that, because this was before cell phones and radios, and then they just take right off and get through all those crossings and not delay anyone. And sometimes at night, they would call the yard master in here to get permission to come in on the main line too. That was there since, I think, 1923, when that thing was manufactured. It was in bad shape. It had been fires lit in it, graffiti all over it, and what had happened is I'd looked at it for years driving by it and wondered about it, and I'd seen these when I was a kid. I always kind of liked them. I always asked my dad what he thought those were. He said, oh, they're toilets for the crews or something like that, but they're actually phone booths. So I always thought they were really pretty neat. The door was missing in it, everything else, and so I called up Pat Fogarty, the signal supervisor at Salem. Used to talk to him quite a bit, and I said, that old phone booth down there, that's kind of interesting. He said, why, do you want it? I said, well, sure. It weighs 3,000 pounds. How am I going to get to Woodburn? He said, don't worry about that. So 6 months later, they brought it up, and that was the last day the Southern Pacific was in existence before the UP took it over.
It was all cement, Frank.
Concrete.
Concrete.
There you go. And so they brought the thing up here, and they set it down. We just had enlarged the fence, so it was really nice. And they set it down inside the new fence, not a scratch on it, right where we wanted it. It took about 3 days to clean this thing up with oven cleaner, muriatic acid, and the like. The doors, I had blueprints from the SP on how to make this door. That cost us about $300 to have that door made up. The little glass was 1920s fiberglass. I found that in a glass glazing shop in Salem. It was in a box of unsold glass from the 1920s. It was brand new 1920s old glass. This phone, I had a friend of mine that collected depot stuff. He didn't want to give it up, and this was out of a phone booth at Coquille. And so I had an 1896 book of rules. He couldn't resist that. So he said, okay, we'll make the trade. And some of these parts in here, we were able to make replica pieces because there was about 8 of these things dumped down at Aurora back in the 60s. So, and the backboard is original. A lot of these little knife switches and lightning arresters came from Al Zazzoni, an old-time lineman, and that was one of the things that he was happy to give, an original wiring. And so a lot of this hardware, door handles and knife switches and all that's original sort of thing. And they painted them U.S. Battleship Gray is what they painted them. So anyway, that was a fun job, I thought, to do. I really enjoyed doing that. There's another view of it with the door shut. Here's a line drop for it too with a Western Union insulator with a line drop that the signal maintainer brought up. So it's all authentic stuff. This was another project here where we put in this pole. This came from Jervis, and this was a Western Union pole. It's red wood. It has a pointed top on it because all the cleat marks of the linemen climbing up and down it. This is part of the first long distance system from Portland to San Francisco for phone service. And so the UP brought that up to us, and we cut it off, and we used a big angle iron that we buried into 48 inches into the ground in the concrete to hold it. We bolted this thing down. And so this was this day, and this is Darrell Kelly, this is Bill Tripp, Paul Garber, who lives about, I think 5 miles east of town here, and some other individuals. And Paul Sears brought in his scissors lift so we could actually put this thing up. Another view here of Bill Tripp, myself. This is another volunteer that was connected with Paul Sears, and here's Paul Garber. There's my old Plymouth Valiant behind us. I still have the thing, I just don't drive it anymore. It's kind of an antique. But Bill actually worked with me for 21 years, and in 2002, unfortunately, at the age of 52, he had a stroke and he died. This was the scissors lift right here that he brought over, Paul Sears brought. Made it very nice to lift all that up into place. This is back in the late 80s here, one of the jaunts of the 44-49 passing us there. It was very nice when they could come down here. That was before Union Pacific control of the line. This is another photo in 1981 returning from the Sacramento Rail Fair. Actually, the whistle blowing on that, we loaned them the whistle off the off the 1785 as a Nathan 6-chime whistle. It sounded much higher pitched with a 300 pounds superheated steam, but it certainly sounded nice.
I remember when the Portland pulled out of Sacramento, and they blew that horn all the way out from the downtown station, all the way out, clear out of town.
This is the SP freight trains that used to pass by with the ST9s in the early 1980s. They had the Mars gyro lights, and they were very individualistic. They had very nice air horns on them, and all of us, miss the SP very much since it's left. So it's kind of nice memories for me anyway.
They were good engines.
Those are very good locomotives. They lasted a long time, more than 40 years in service. This is myself and John Taylor, who was the retired fireman engineer, and he was president of our group in the late, I think 1980s to early 90s. And he was a great storyteller of railroad stories. They were real stories of what happened to people and events, and they were just terrific. So he had quite a rich contribution in that. And of course, young people loved him and his wife. They'd go over to their house to hear the stories and like. And unfortunately, he died in 1998, and his wife died the year after.
Is he a Portland division
Yes, mostly he was, but then he traded down to the LA division, I guess around 1970. That's why you wouldn't know him. But originally he hired on in 1943 and worked at the Imperial Valley for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and then came up here to get hired on in Salem. And then he worked here till about well, maybe it was earlier than that. It might have been in the 60s when he was down there. And then he finally retired down there, but he came back here to retire and live. This is Clint Crettenden's artwork. We're going to look a little bit at the artwork. This is a promotional thing for the Oregonian Railway Historical Society that we formed about 1985. This was a t-shirt pattern, but he liked to do artwork. He is an illustrator, and that's the sort of thing that he does. This is original artwork by David McDonald, which actually hung on the wall here for many, many years. And he was the father-in-law of Frank Torrey, who was our Woodburn Public Works director at the time. When he retired, he wanted to take the photo with him. But this is something that he wanted to do, and it's kind of a facsimile of the 1785. Now this is Joe Dale's artwork, and talked about that at the beginning. This represents the engine at Fresno, 1955. Very nice job, I think. You know, he does wonderful work. And then, of course, this is the front view of the engine, original artwork. This was a man, Anthony Solano, who lives in Whittier, California. He'd never seen the engine in person. He read about it and the like. He called me up and said he'd like to do this painting for me. And I kind of told him what I was kind of looking for. San Joaquin Valley. It's kind of fictional. My dad and myself going along, because we used to chase the steam trains between Oregon City and Canby. And so this is me leaning out the window, and my dad driving the 50 Ford two-door coupe, and this is 99 along there in someplace in Northern California. I think he did a very nice job on it. This is a model built by Glacier Parks, O-scale models. I don't know how many of these they built, maybe a few hundred of them. They're very expensive, and so there's a few details they didn't quite get right on it, but I think they did overall a pretty nice job on it. This is Chuck Fulbert, Public Works employee. This is, he actually takes care of all the Woodburn's public works or public vehicles here, the buses and the like, and of course he's a very good painter, and so he came over to work on this. Actually the paint, we've actually brought in Public Works to do the work because we're just running out of time at the time. This is Jerry Boakholder. He was another Public Works employee that was painting that day. This was George Vistica, and he's a Public Works supervisor, and I think, and he's a pretty good painter too. He painted the left side. And yeah, good. Here is the Public Works director, Dan Brown, mixing new paint, 2010. This is the end result here of the paint job that we did. This was just about the time of the convention. I think it was actually the day before the convention. It was a warm day, but we had the engine all cleaned up for the SP Technical Historical Society. I think we had about 60 people, 70 people come over for that day. And that was a hot day too. It was well into the 90s. The people, they only were here about an hour, and they wanted to get out of here. And they're from California. It was just hot, the humidity, so they wanted to get back on the air-conditioned bus and get out of here as quick as they could. And this was the day before here. And this is Joe Dale Morris, rail historian, and restorer. And this is Bob Church. He's a noted rail historian. Of course, Matt Gwynn, supervisor here, and Dan Brown, our Public Works director, our mayor, Kathy Figley, and Jim Rao, Parks director. And this is the 1744. Now this engine is a sister engine to the 1785. It's a class M6 I think it was actually built 1901, a little earlier, and it ran around California. It was used at Sacramento. They actually had a fan trip in 1958 with this engine, and then it was in service, or it was in standby at the Sacramento Roundhouse for quite a while, and then it was donated to these people in I think it was Corrine, Utah, which is east of Salt Lake City. There were some other engines there. Corinne. Okay, and they got it running in 1980, and then for some reason it wasn't running anymore. So apparently this Rio Grande Pacific Corporation that Joe Dale worked for, they'd gotten together and purchased this engine for a rail operation in the New Orleans area. The engine was put on a lowboy. I think it was a lowboy, or either it was a flat car, and they sent it to Dallas Fort Worth, and that's where Joe Dale worked on it. And I think it was a good year. It was very hard work, very hot out there and everything, and I would design parts for him, missing parts, blow down mufflers were missing, a lot of stuff was cut off of it. So I would make drawings of these parts, and then Joe would have them machined. So he got it back to an authentic SP restoration. And so later on, the railroad, they didn't really advertise it. It only lasted about 90 days. And this thing went through the Katrina hurricane down there. It was under a tarp. It didn't even hurt it, unfortunately. And then I'd heard something about the Army Corps of Engineers wanted to dump it into the place there to make part of the new levee out of it. Of course, they said no, which was a good thing. And it got sold to these people out in Colorado. And they weren't very experienced. They're running up 3% grades with heavyweight cars and just force firing it, and they actually burn up the firebox on it. So it's out of service, and they want to rebuild it, but they want to make it look like a Rio Grande engine. They put a different whistle on it and the like. And so we do have a video here of this engine running. And what I wanted to say before we get started, this is what the 1785 would look like if we actually were able to get it running. And I have some of the proposals on that. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the 1744. It has the same whistle that we have. It sounds pretty much the same. And so I think this will give you a good idea.
It's a whistle cord above his head.
This is Joe Dale Morris, actually is the engineer. I don't know why we're not getting sound. I think we're hearing a little bit of steam hissing there. A little more noise. Still a little quiet. Can you hear that?
Yeah, surely. I can see it.
These are old double-decker commuter cars is what those things are. Okay, well, there you have it. This is, about 10 years ago, formed a group called Cascade Scenic Railroad in Salem, Oregon. It's got a nonprofit status, 503c IRS status, and so we've been talking about this for years, about this line up to Silverton and running trains up there. So I designed a depot. This was about 2000, I think about 2001 or something when I did this. And so this is they call this a CS or Common Center 22 depot, circa about 1910. It's a wood station, and that's the elevations, the outside of it. Here's the floor plan to it, waiting area, gift shop, tickets, and nice ADA restrooms, which you have to have for this sort of an operation. This is the plot plan. I wanted to show where the depot is. This is Front Street, Cleveland Street, Young Street. And so this is the road. The engine sits here right now. And this is the water tank still standing. The old tank they took down. This is the old water works. This is the old pump house. So in here we've got this depot structure, 335-foot loading platform. There's fences around this. We're going to have to get a lot line adjustment. This is about where the pole line goes through, and we have a road in here. And there's 84 parking spaces in here, and we probably could get more if we just, since this old tank is gone, we change this road to go out this way. We could actually have some more parking spots. So we probably will have over 100 spots. So that kind of gives you an idea. The depot, I know it was almost $300,000 to build. And of course you have this parking lot and everything, so it's quite a little bit of money to do this project. This is what happens if we don't get the engine running with Cascade Scenic. We'll have to put a shelter over the engine that costs about $50,000. Dean Morrison worked in the engineering section of Woodburn Public Works years ago, and he did this for me, artist rendition of what that could look like. But anyway, this Cascade Scenic thing, I'd probably project it out maybe 5 years. And we're on our end of it, we're probably looking at about $2.5 to $3 million to rehabilitate the engine, build a depot, build the shops, and all those things that we'd have to do, and cars and all that. And it's up to Dave Rudd. He has to purchase the line first from the Union Pacific, and that's been not too easy with what, you know, they want a lot more money for it, and revenues with this economy haven't been that good. But he'd certainly like to do it, and I'm just thinking maybe it might be 5 years out, maybe the thing can run. So I'm just going to kind of leave you with that, and I hope you enjoyed the time together with the engine here and knowing just what it's gone through and its history and legacy, which is good for Woodburn. It creates a sense of place in the city, and this town is actually getting better, I think, over the years. It's a lot cleaner, a lot more civil here. I think there's quite a future. This thing, we figured about 53,000 riders a year between May and October. That was just a conservative figure, and if each one of those persons spends $1 in Woodburn, and that can turn over 6 times as to be $350,000, a conservative figure of business coming into the Woodburn area. So we'd like to see that happen for the businesses downtown and all that. So I think it's nothing but good if it can happen. And so we'd have these, we'd just run on weekends, basically Saturday and Sundays, special holidays, maybe some special trips around Christmas time, a Santa Claus special, something like that. So that would be the thing. My choice would be to have Joe Dale Morris come out here, hire him to come out here, supervise, overhaul this thing. He's quite capable of it. He loves the engine, and so I think that's a very good possibility. And so I would trust him to do much of that work. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. We just hope there's a future that'll benefit the city, and so I just thank you very much for coming. Have a nice day. Oh, forgot. Questions and answer time.
If they did this thing between Woodburn and Silverton, they could have a dinner car put on behind there and do like they have done in other places around Oregon for that.
whole study's been done by ODOT Rail. It's a whole book on this whole thing that we did, and I did a study on it too. And so yes, the thing is take people up to the Oregon Gardens and have double-decker buses, take them to the gardens, take them to the antique shops and artist galleries and things in Silverton. We'd also offer a train trip out to Gear, which is a scenic trip, which is another, well, I think it's another 7 or 8 miles out there, and turn it on the Y and come back. And so there'd be 2 trips going up and 2 trips coming back every day on this thing. So that would be the thing.
You mean run an excursion, not a tourist excursion?
Well, it'd actually be a tourist thing. That's what we charge regular fares on it. Be a regular scheduled train. So I don't know if you can call it an excursion. Just a matter of definition.
Well, you get into a little problem if you have a tourist train with Uncle Sam, you know.
We're non-profit. All the profit goes back into this project. Okay, any other questions?
What do we eat?
I wish I knew. Is there anybody that wants to give any kind of testimony to this project or anything? A lot of people have helped here.
Remember in '99 I inspected that because I was a locomotive inspector for the ICC all over the country. Remember we had the smoke box? You were here then.
I think so, yeah, we looked at it. Yeah, I remember,
The
yeah.
smoke box open, I checked the fluid, and I crawled in through the firebox door and went into the firebox, and then tubes and the bushings and bearings on the rods.
Well, it's got, what's that?
Repair work.
Tubes and flues, firebox patches, new springs on it, valve gear rebuilt.
Brickwork, new staples.
Oh yeah, lots of staples. So there's a lot of work to do there, lifting it up off the frame and all that sort of thing. Anybody else?
Well, Frank, I think the city of Woodburn knows you were real good at practice.
Yeah, well, I've been here almost 35 years in June. I wish I had $1 for every hour I worked. I could retire. No, it's been fun. I like little towns, and it's been a real joy sharing my history, and I learn a lot more all the time about the SP, and I'm working on a book about these type of engines on the SP. So we're always learning something. It's kind of fun to do it and fun to do things for other people. So it's been my way of giving back and sharing with you all my feelings of things of the past. Yes, Tom?
I just want these people to know that I helped Frank a little bit
Yeah.
a year ago summer
Yeah.
on this thing, and you know, to be honest with you, that's probably the last time Frank's going to be able to do this. It's not an easy job. He did 10 hours at least for every hour I did, and I was worn out. And you know, if you don't at least get a cover over it,
Gotta get it covered, yeah.
it's going to look like it did in whatever that was, 77. I know, because I've worked on a few others like this, and you know, if you don't at least get the thing protected from the elements up here, it's going to look pretty sorry in 10 years. Because Frank is not, unless somebody comes along, you know, there could be somebody young, full of vim and vigor, but the chances are slim and none.
And the knowledge is dying.
Well, yeah, he did a fabulous job. I don't know. Yeah, that's just my thoughts. Wonderful to get the things teamed up.
Commended for his efforts.
Oh, heavens, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. This is a Mayor, Kathy Figley.
And I didn't want Frank to get away, or this afternoon to get away, without a very public thank you to Frank. Frank, I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate everything you've done so much. And we hope you found, many of you have quite a bit of history with this engine, but I hope everyone else has found this as fascinating as I have over the years. And we do have some refreshments back there, and Frank will be around both to answer any questions. And of course, today is beautiful, and the engine is 2 blocks away.